In a luxurious New York City ballroom, 35-year-old Ethan Crowe, a successful lawyer, heard a strange teenager say, "My brother has a birthmark just like yours." These words turned his world upside down. A long-standing secret, an unjust accusation, and a struggle for the truth began to unravel. Ethan didn't realize that there was a conspiracy behind the scenes that destroyed his family, but now he's ready to set the record straight, legally. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria in New York City shimmered with opulence on a crisp April evening in 2025. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the high ceiling, casting a kaleidoscope of soft light across the polished marble floor. The walls, adorned with intricate gold filigree, glowed warmly, while towering arrangements of white roses, lilies, and peonies filled the air with a delicate fragrance. Men in crisp black tuxedos and women in flowing evening gowns mingled gracefully, their laughter and conversation blending with the gentle notes of a live pianist who played with a refined touch. It was a night of elegance, purpose, and charity, a night that Ethan Crowe, a 35-year-old attorney with a reputation as sharp as his tailored suits, had orchestrated with precision. Ethan stood near the center of the room, a glass of champagne in hand, his tall frame cutting an impressive figure. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his piercing green eyes scanned the crowd with a quiet confidence. Known for his tireless work defending the underprivileged and his generous contributions to children's causes, Ethan was a man who wore success like a second skin. Tonight's event, a fundraiser for orphans across the city, was his latest triumph, a chance to give back to a world that had given him so much. Guests approached him with smiles and firm handshakes, praising his speech earlier that evening about hope, resilience, and the power of community. Yet, beneath his polished exterior, Ethan carried a restless energy, a sense that something was missing from his carefully constructed life. As the evening wore on, the crowd thinned slightly, and Ethan stepped toward a table draped in a pristine white cloth, where a display showcased photos of smiling children and plans for new educational programs. He adjusted a frame, lost in thought, when a soft tug at his sleeve snapped him back to reality. He looked down to see a boy, no older than 15, standing before him. The kid had a mop of unruly brown hair and wide, curious hazel eyes that sparkled with a mix of nervousness and excitement. His clothes, a slightly oversized white shirt and dark pants, stood out against the sea of formal attire, marking him as an outsider in this world of wealth. "Hey, mister," the boy said, his voice clear and steady despite the faint quiver in it. "My brother's got the same birthmark as you." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. He glanced at his left wrist, where a small, star-shaped birthmark peeked out from beneath his cufflink, a mark he'd always dismissed as a quirk, something he rarely thought about. He chuckled lightly, brushing it off. "Is that so? Well, I guess it's not as unique as I thought." But the boy didn't laugh. He tilted his head, studying Ethan with an intensity that made the attorney pause. "No, really, it's exactly the same. Right here." He pointed to his own wrist, mimicking the spot where Ethan's birthmark Saturday. "My brother says it's special. Makes us different." Ethan's smile faltered, a flicker of unease stirring in his chest. He crouched down to the boy's level, meeting his gaze. "That's a nice thought. What's your name, kid?" "Jacob," the boy replied, his grin widening. "Jacob Riley. I'm here 'cause they said we could see the fancy people helping kids like me. I'm from St. Mary's Home, the orphanage." Ethan's mind clicked into gear. He'd invited a handful of kids from local shelters to attend, a gesture to show them the world beyond their circumstances. Jacob must have been one of them. "Well, Jacob, I'm Ethan. Ethan Crowe. Glad you could make it. Where's your brother tonight?" Jacob's grin faded slightly, his shoulders slumping. "He's not around right now. Had to leave a while back. Trouble with some big shots," he said. "But he's out there somewhere." "I know it." Ethan nodded, sensing there was more to the story but not wanting to press. "Sounds like he's a tough guy. I'm sure he's proud of you for being here." "Yeah, maybe," Jacob said, brightening again. "You're cool, Mr. Crowe. Like one of those heroes in the movies." Ethan laughed, standing up and ruffling Jacob's hair. "Thanks, Jacob. You're not so bad yourself. Stick around, okay? Enjoy the night." Jacob gave a quick nod and darted back into the crowd, disappearing among the sea of gowns and tuxedos. Ethan watched him go, the boy's words echoing in his mind. "My brother's got the same birthmark as you." It was a small thing, a coincidence, surely. Yet something about it gnawed at him, a thread he couldn't quite let go of. As the evening wound down, Ethan mingled with the last of the guests, accepting their praise and promises of donations. The pianist's final notes faded, and the ballroom began to empty, leaving behind the faint clink of glasses and the rustle of departing footsteps. Ethan lingered, his thoughts drifting back to Jacob. He pulled out his phone and texted his assistant, Mia, find out more about a kid named Jacob Riley from St. Mary's home. And anything on his brother. He hit send, then slipped the phone back into his pocket, unsure why it felt so urgent. Later that night, in his sleek Manhattan penthouse, Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline sprawling before him like a glittering puzzle. The birthmark comment shouldn't have mattered. It was just a kid being a kid. But as he stared at his reflection in the glass, his wrist caught his eye. He rolled up his sleeve, tracing the star-shaped mark with his thumb. It was faint, barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. His mother had once said it was a family trait, something passed down through generations. But she'd never elaborated, and Ethan had never cared to ask. His parents were gone now, his father to a heart attack a decade ago, his mother to cancer shortly after. The past was a closed book, or so he'd thought. He crossed the room to a shelf in his study, where a dusty family album sat untouched for years. He hesitated, then pulled it down, the leather cover creaking as he opened it. Flipping through faded photos, he stopped at one, a family portrait from when he was 5. There, standing beside his parents, was his Uncle Richard, tall, broad-shouldered, with a warm smile. Ethan's breath caught as he noticed it, the same star-shaped birthmark on Richard's wrist, clear as day in the old Polaroid. Richard had vanished when Ethan was a kid, disappearing after a messy legal battle that no one in the family ever talked about. Whispers of scandal, accusations of fraud, a ruined reputation. Ethan had pieced together fragments over the years, but the details were murky. His mother had shut down any questions with a tight-lipped, "It's better left alone." Now, staring at the photo, Ethan felt a chill. Could Jacob's brother, some guy tangled up with big shots, be connected to Richard? To him? His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. A message from Mia. Jacob Riley, 15, at St. Mary's for 3 years. Brother, Matt Riley, 25, missing since 2023 after a run-in with Hartman Partners law firm. No records since. Ethan's pulse quickened. Hartman Partners. The name hit like a punch. They were legal titans, a firm Ethan had clashed with in court more than once. Ruthless, powerful, and not above bending the rules. If Matt had crossed them, he'd have been in deep. Ethan set the album down, his mind racing. A birthmark. A missing brother. A shady law firm. It could all be nothing, just a string of coincidences. But as he looked out at the city, its lights pulsing like a heartbeat, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't let it go. Something was pulling him toward the truth, and he'd be damned if he didn't find it. Ethan Crowe woke to the hum of Manhattan outside his penthouse windows, the city's restless energy seeping through the glass. It was barely dawn on April 10th, 2025, but sleep had eluded him, chased away by the echo of Jacob Riley's words and the faded photo of Uncle Richard staring up from the family album on his coffee table. The star-shaped birthmark on Richard's wrist, so eerily similar to his own, had lodged itself in his mind like a splinter. And now, with Mia's text about Matt Riley's disappearance tied to Hartman Partners, the pieces of a puzzle he didn't yet understand were starting to take shape. Ethan wasn't a man who let mysteries fester. He thrived on answers, on justice. Today, he'd start digging. He brewed a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the sleek, minimalist kitchen, and sat at the counter with his laptop. A quick search on Hartman Partners pulled up the usual, a glossy website touting their unparalleled legal expertise, a roster of high-profile clients, and a reputation for winning at any cost. Ethan knew them well too well. He'd faced their lead attorney, Howard Hartman, in court 3 years ago over a pro bono case defending a whistleblower. Hartman had been ruthless, twisting evidence and witnesses until the case collapsed. Ethan had lost, and it still stung. If Matt Riley had tangled with them, he'd have been outmatched from the start. Mia arrived at 8 a.m., her sharp bob and sharper wit a welcome presence. She dropped a thin file on the counter, her hazel eyes gleaming with curiosity. Jacob and Matt Riley, she said, sliding into a stool. Not much on the kid's standard orphanage stuff. Been at St. Mary's since his mom died 3 years ago. No dad in the picture. Matt's a different story. Worked as a courier for Hartman Partners until mid-2023. Then poof, gone. No job, no address, no nothing. Last thing on record is a police report. He was questioned about missing documents, but no charges stuck. Ethan flipped through the file, his jaw tightening. Hartman Partners. Figures. They don't lose loose ends. They bury them. Mia raised an eyebrow. You think they ran him off? Or worse? I don't know yet, Ethan said, sipping his coffee. But a 25-year-old doesn't just vanish unless someone wants him gone. And Jacob said, trouble with big shots. That's not a kid making stuff up. He paused, tapping the file. I need more. This ties back to my family somehow. I can feel it. That birthmark, it's not a coincidence. Mia leaned forward, her voice dropping. You're talking about your uncle, aren't you? Richard? The one your mom clammed up about. Ethan nodded, his gaze drifting to the album. He had the same mark. Disappeared when I was a kid after some legal mess. Mom said it was a scandal, fraud, maybe. Never got the full story. If Matt's got it too, and he's mixed up with Hartman, there's a thread here. I just need to pull it. You're gonna need help, Mia said, practical as ever. Someone who can dig deeper than I can. I'd say a PI. I know a good one, Leah Thompson. Ex-cop, discreet, doesn't mess around. Do it, Ethan said without hesitation. Set up a meeting. Today if she's free. By noon, Ethan sat across from Leah Thompson in a cramped office tucked above a deli in Hell's Kitchen. The space smelled faintly of pastrami and coffee, a stark contrast to the polished boardrooms he usually frequented. Leah was a wiry woman in her early 40s, with short-cropped black hair and a no-nonsense stare that could cut through steel. She listened as Ethan recounted the charity event, Jacob's comment, and Matt's disappearance, her pen scratching notes on a yellow legal pad. So, she said, leaning back in her chair, you've got a missing guy, a kid with a hunch, and a birthmark tying it to your long-lost uncle. And you think Hartman Partners is the glue. That about right. Pretty much, Ethan replied, meeting her gaze. I need to know who Matt Riley is, where he went, and what Hartman did to him. And if it connects to Richard Crowe, my uncle, I want that too. Leah tapped her pen against the pad. Hartman's a shark tank. If they're involved, they've covered their tracks. But I'll find Matt. Start with his last knowns, apartment, co-workers, anything the cops missed. As for your uncle, give me what you've got. Old records, family stuff. I'll see what sticks. Ethan handed her a photo of Richard from the album and a brief rundown of what little he remembered. A business deal gone sour, accusations of embezzlement, a sudden exit from the family's life. That's all I've got, he said. Mom wouldn't talk about it. Dad just said Richard screwed up. Families are great at burying skeletons, Leah said dryly. I'll dig. Give me a week. And watch your back. Hartman's not above playing dirty if they sniff you're poking around. Ethan left the meeting with a mix of anticipation and dread. Leah's warning lingered, but he brushed it off. He'd faced worse than corporate bullies in his career. Back at his penthouse, he tried to focus on work. Case files, emails, but his mind kept drifting. The birthmark. Richard. Matt. Hartman. It was a tangle of threads, and he needed to unravel it. That evening, as he sorted through a stack of mail, a plain envelope slipped out. No return address, no stamp. Frowning, he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in stark black letters. Leave it alone, Crowe, or you'll regret it. His pulse spiked, but he didn't flinch. Threats weren't new in his line of work. He'd had angry clients, disgruntled defendants, even a stalker once. But this felt different, personal. He snapped a photo of the note and texted it to Leah with a quick message. Got this today. They're watching. Leah's reply came fast. Noted. Means we're on the right track. Stay sharp. Ethan set the note aside, his resolve hardening. If Hartman thought a cheap scare would stop him, they didn't know who they were dealing with. He wasn't just an attorney. He was a man who'd built his life on fighting for what was right, no matter the cost. And now, with Jacob's innocent observation and Matt's shadowy fate pulling him in, this wasn't just about curiosity anymore. It was about truth. The next few days blurred by in a haze of work and waiting. Ethan kept up appearances, court hearings, client meetings, a forced smile at a colleague's dinner party. But beneath it all, he was restless. Leah checked in sporadically, her updates sparse but promising. A lead on Matt's old roommate, a possible sighting in Brooklyn. Then, on the 5th day, she called. Found something, she said, her voice tight with excitement. Matt's alive, hiding out in a dive bar in Bushwick. I've got an address. Meet me there tomorrow, 8 p.m. And Ethan, bring that lawyer grit. He's scared, and he won't talk easy. Ethan hung up, adrenaline surging. Matt Riley was out there, and with him, Maybe the key to everything. Richard, the birthmark, Hartman's secrets. He didn't know what he'd find in that bar, but one thing was clear. The search had just begun, and there was no turning back. The neon sign above the rusty anchor in Bushwick flickered erratically, casting a sickly yellow glow over the cracked sidewalk. It was April 15th, 2025, and the air carried the bite of early spring, sharp against Ethan Crowe's skin as he stepped out of his car. The bar was a dive, peeling paint, grimy windows, the kind of place that thrived on anonymity. Leah Thompson waited by the entrance, her leather jacket blending into the shadows, her sharp eyes scanning the street. She gave Ethan a curt nod as he approached, her expression unreadable but tense. "Matt's inside," she said, keeping her voice low. "Back booth, hoodie up. He's jittery, bolted twice already when I tried to get close. You're the lawyer. Use that charm. We need him talking." Ethan adjusted his tie, an odd contrast to the bar's rough edges, and squared his shoulders. "Got it. What's his deal?" "Scared out of his mind," Leah replied, pulling a cigarette from her pocket but not lighting it. "Says Hartman Partners pinned something on him. Documents gone missing. Big money involved. He ran when they threatened his kid brother, Jacob. Thinks they're still after him." Ethan's stomach tightened. Jacob. The boy's wide-eyed comment about the birthmark flashed in his mind, tying this mess closer to home. "Let's move," he said, pushing through the door. Inside, the rusty anchor reeked of stale beer and cigarette smoke. A handful of patrons hunched over their drinks, ignoring the newcomers. The jukebox crooned a scratchy blues tune, barely audible over the murmur of low voices. Ethan spotted Matt immediately, a lanky figure in a gray hoodie, hunched in the farthest booth, his hands wrapped around a half-empty glass. His face was pale, shadowed by stubble, and his eyes darted nervously as Ethan and Leah approached. "Matt Riley," Ethan said, sliding into the seat across from him. Leah stayed standing, a silent sentinel at the table's edge. Matt flinched, his hand tightening on the glass. "Who are you? Cops? Hartman's goons?" "Neither," Ethan said, keeping his tone steady. "I'm Ethan Crowe, an attorney. This is Leah Thompson. She's helping me find you. We're not here to hurt you. We're here about your brother, Jacob." Matt's eyes narrowed, suspicion etched into every line of his face. "Jacob? What's he got to do with this? He's safe at St. Mary's, right?" "He's fine," Ethan assured him. "I met him at a fundraiser last week. He mentioned your birthmark, same as mine." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing the star-shaped mark. "Got me curious. Then I heard you'd vanished after crossing Hartman Partners. I think there's more to it." Matt stared at the birthmark, his breath catching. Slowly, he pushed up his own sleeve, revealing an identical mark on his wrist. "No way," he muttered, almost to himself. "You're one of us?" "One of who?" Ethan pressed, leaning forward. Matt hesitated, glancing at Leah, then back to Ethan. "Look, man, I don't know you. But if you're digging into Hartman, you're in over your head. They don't mess around. I was just a courier, delivered papers, ran errands. Then one day, I overhear a shredding party in the basement. Files, evidence, stuff they didn't want seen. Next thing I know, a stack of contracts goes missing, and they're pointing at me. Said I'd stolen him, sold him. Threatened to lock me up, or worse, unless I disappeared." Ethan's mind raced. Hartman Partners shredding evidence? It fit their playbook, ruthless, calculated. "What kind of files?" he asked. "Dunno exactly," Matt said, running a hand through his hair. "Old stuff, 20 years back, maybe more. Something about a takeover, a company they tanked. They caught me listening, and that was it. I ran. Left Jacob behind to keep him safe. Been bouncing around ever since." Ethan exchanged a look with Leah. 20 years ago. Uncle Richard's scandal had hit around then, accusations of fraud, a business deal that imploded. Could it be the same case? "Matt," he said carefully, "my uncle, Richard Crowe, got burned by Hartman too. Same time frame. He had this birthmark. Disappeared after they ruined him. You ever hear that name?" Matt frowned, searching his memory. "Crowe, maybe. One of the guys in the basement mentioned a Crowe job, laughing about how they cleaned it up good. I thought it was just talk. You saying we're related?" "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted. "But I'm starting to think Hartman's got a history of burying people like us. I need proof of something solid." Matt snorted, a bitter edge to his voice. "Good luck. They're untouchable. I tried telling the cops, nobody listened. No evidence, no case. They own half the precinct anyway." "Then we make our own evidence," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I'm not letting them win again. Not with you, not with Richard. Help me, Matt. Let's take them down, legally." Matt studied him, doubt warring with a flicker of hope. Finally, he nodded. Fine. I've got nothing left to lose. But we're playing with fire. Leah stepped in, her tone brisk. We'll start with what you heard. Names, dates, anything. I'll track down old employees, see if anyone's willing to talk. Ethan, you hit the legal angle, archives, court records. The next few days were a whirlwind. Matt moved into a safe spot Leah arranged, a rundown motel on the edge of Brooklyn, while Ethan pored over dusty legal databases at his office. He found Richard's case, a 2004 lawsuit claiming he'd embezzled funds from a family shipping business, Crowe Maritime. Hartman Partners had represented the rival firm that took it over after Richard's conviction. The evidence had been airtight, too airtight. Ethan smelled a setup. Then Leah called with a breakthrough. Got a hit, she said. Ex-clerk from Hartman's office, fired in '05. Says she saw files marked Crowe get shredded after the trial. She's shaky, but she'll meet us. Tomorrow, noon, Central Park. Ethan's pulse quickened. A witness. It wasn't much, but it was a crack in Hartman's armor. He met Matt that night at the motel, filling him in. This could tie your frame up to Richard's, he said. Same playbook, fake evidence, forced exits. Matt clenched his fists, anger flaring. They took everything, my job, my life, my brother. If they did it to your uncle too, they've been at this a long time. Too long, Ethan agreed. But we're not running. We're fighting. The next day, they met the clerk, a nervous woman named Carla, her hands trembling as she handed over a faded memo. It's all I kept, she whispered. Mentions Crowe cleanup and Hartman's orders. I quit after that. Too dirty. Ethan scanned the page, his blood running cold. Howard Hartman's signature stared back at him. The conspiracy was real, and it stretched back decades. But as he slipped the memo into his briefcase, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered, and a gravelly voice rasped. Back off, Crowe, or the kid gets it. Jacob. Ethan's heart stopped. The line went dead, and he turned to Leah, his voice steel. They're targeting Jacob. We need to move now. Ethan Crowe's world narrowed to the buzz of his phone still clutched in his hand, the gravelly threat echoing in his ears. Back off, Crowe, or the kid gets it. It was April 16th, 2025, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Central Park, where he stood with Leah Thompson and Matt Riley. Carla, the ex-clerk, had just slipped away into the crowd, her trembling hands leaving behind a memo that tied Howard Hartman to the Crowe cleanup decades ago. But now, that victory felt hollow. Jacob, 15 years old, innocent, and tied to this mess by blood and chance, was in danger. Ethan's jaw clenched as he shoved the phone into his pocket, his mind racing. They're going after Jacob, he said, his voice low and taut. Hartman's playing hardball. Leah's eyes narrowed, her ex-cop instincts kicking in. They're watching us, knew we were here. Probably tracked Carla. I'll get Jacob secured. St. Mary's isn't safe if they're this bold. Matt stepped forward, his face pale but his fists tight. No way they touch my brother. I'll go get him myself. Not alone, Ethan cut in, his tone firm. You're a target too. Leah, call your contacts, get Jacob somewhere Hartman can't reach. Matt, you stay with me. We've got the memo, Carla's story, and your testimony. We hit them legally, not with fists. Matt's eyes flashed with frustration, but he nodded. Leah was already on her phone, barking orders to an old precinct buddy. Within an hour, Jacob was whisked from St. Mary's to his safe house upstate, guarded by two off-duty cops Leah trusted. Ethan exhaled, but the weight didn't lift. Hartman had escalated. This wasn't just about silencing Matt or burying Richard's past anymore. It was personal. Back at his Manhattan penthouse, Ethan spread the evidence across his dining table. The memo, Matt's account, Richard's old case files he'd pulled from court archives. The pattern was clear. In 2004, Hartman Partners had fabricated evidence to frame Richard Crowe for embezzlement, tanking Crowe Maritime and handing it to a rival firm they represented. Richard had been convicted, disgraced, and vanished, presumed dead by the family. 20 years later, Matt had stumbled onto a similar scheme, missing contracts pinned on him to cover Hartman's tracks. The birthmark linked them, a quiet clue to a bloodline Hartman seemed hellbent on erasing. But why? Ethan paced, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood. Richard had been small-time, a shipping owner, not a titan. Matt was a nobody, a courier. The only common thread was Hartman's ruthless ambition. Then it hit him. Crowe Maritime hadn't just been a business. Old records showed it sat on prime coastal land that, after the takeover, became a multi-million-dollar port development. Hartman hadn't just ruined Richard, he'd profited. And Matt? He'd seen something, maybe proof of that original sin, that Hartman couldn't let resurface. Ethan's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. He answered, steeling himself. "Crowe," he said curtly. A smooth, familiar voice came through, Howard Hartman himself. Ethan, you're stirring up old ghosts. I thought you were smarter than this." Ethan's grip tightened. "Threatening a kid, Howard? That's low, even for you." A dry chuckle. "Business is business. You've got no proof, just a scared runaway and a nervous typist. Walk away, or your little charity crusader image goes up in smoke. I've got friends who'd love to hear you're unhinged, chasing conspiracies, harassing upstanding firms." Ethan's blood boiled, but he kept his voice even. "I've got enough to bury you. Court's my playground, not yours. Try me." Hartman's tone hardened. "Last chance, Crowe. Drop it, or you'll lose more than a case." The line clicked dead. Matt, sitting on the couch, looked up, his eyes wide. "That him?" "Yeah," Ethan said, tossing the phone onto the table. "He's rattled. Thinks he can scare me off with smear campaigns and muscle. He's wrong." But the next morning, the psychological war began. Ethan woke to a flood of emails from colleagues and clients, rumors swirling that he'd lost his edge, was obsessed with a vendetta against Hartman. A tabloid blog ran a hit piece. Star attorney Ethan Crowe unravels over family delusions. His assistant, Mia, called in a panic, saying 2 major clients had pulled out, citing instability. Hartman was hitting his reputation, his lifeline, with surgical precision. Ethan stormed into his office, slamming the door. He could fight in court, but this was a battlefield of perception, murky, brutal. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was he risking everything, his career, his name, for a hunch? For a kid and a runaway he barely knew? He stared at the memo, Hartman's signature mocking him. Then he thought of Jacob's hopeful grin, Matt's haunted eyes, Richard's faded photo. No, Hartman didn't get to win again. He called Leah. "They're smearing me." "Jacob's safe. Locked down," she confirmed. "Cops say no one's come sniffing. Hartman's bluffing there, hitting you where it hurts instead." "Good. I'm filing a lawsuit. Fraud, coercion, evidence tampering, everything we've got. We drag this into the open." Leah whistled. "Bold. They'll fight dirty." "Let them," Ethan said, his voice steel. "I've got the law on my side." That afternoon, he drafted the complaint, his fingers flying over the keyboard. He named Hartman Partners, Howard personally, and laid out the conspiracy, Richard's frame-up, Matt's exile, the shredded files. Matt sat beside him, recounting every detail he could remember, names he'd overheard, dates, the basement shredding. Leah faxed over Carla's signed affidavit. It wasn't airtight yet, but it was enough to start. As night fell, Ethan stood by his penthouse window, the city's lights a defiant glow against the dark. He felt eyes on him, Hartman's spies, maybe. His doorman had reported a stranger lingering earlier, and a black sedan had idled across the street too long for comfort. The pressure was suffocating, a vice tightening around his life. He could quit, let Hartman win, rebuild his reputation in peace. But that wasn't who he was. His phone buzzed, a text from Mia. Found an old Crowe Maritime shareholder. Says Richard was set up, willing to testify. Call me. Ethan's lips curved into a grim smile. Another crack in Hartman's wall. The fight was far from over, but he wasn't alone anymore. Matt, Jacob, Leah, even ghosts like Richard, they were with him. Hartman wanted a war? He'd get one. And Ethan would win it, not with fists or threats, but with the truth, wielded like a blade in a courtroom. The courtroom buzzed with tension on April 25, 2025, as Ethan Crowe stood at the plaintiff's table in the Southern District of New York. The wood-paneled room, with its high ceilings and stern portraits of past judges, felt like a battlefield, one Ethan knew well. Across from him, Howard Hartman sat with his legal team, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his smug smile a silent taunt. The gallery was packed, reporters, colleagues, even a few curious onlookers drawn by the headlines. Star attorney takes on legal giant in family conspiracy case. Ethan's suit against Hartman Partners had exploded into a media storm, and today, it would end. He adjusted his tie, his green eyes steady, the star-shaped birthmark on his wrist a quiet reminder of why he was here. For days, Ethan had barely slept, fueled by coffee and conviction. The evidence was stacked. Matt Riley's testimony about his frame-up, Carla's affidavit on the shredded Crowe cleanup files, the memo with Howard's signature, and now a bombshell, Mia's find. a former Crowe Maritime shareholder named Daniel Voss. Voss, a wiry man in his 70s, had come forward with records proving Richard Crowe's innocence in the 2004 embezzlement scandal. Hartman Partners had forged documents to seize the company's lucrative coastal land, pocketing millions from its redevelopment. Ethan's case tied it all together, a decades-long pattern of fraud and coercion from Richard to Matt, orchestrated by Howard himself. The judge, a stern woman with gray streaks in her hair, called the room to order. Ethan stepped forward, his voice clear and commanding. "Your Honor, this isn't just about my uncle or Matthew Riley. It's about a system that preys on the vulnerable, that buries truth under lies and money. We have proof, documents, witnesses, a trail of corruption stretching 20 years. Hartman Partners didn't just ruin lives, they built an empire on it. Today, we hold them accountable." Howard's team fought back, their lead counsel, a slick attorney named Preston, dismissing the evidence as circumstantial and Ethan as a man obsessed with rewriting history. They leaned on Howard's pristine reputation, painting Matt as a thief and Carla as unreliable. But Ethan was ready. He called Matt to the stand, his voice steady as he recounted the basement shredding, the threats, his flight to protect Jacob. Carla followed, her hands trembling but her words firm, detailing the Crowe job cover-up. Then Voss took the stand, his gravelly voice cutting through the room as he presented the original Crowe Maritime ledgers, untouched by Hartman's forgeries. The turning point came when Ethan introduced the memo. Howard's signature glared under the projector's light, a damning link to the past. Preston objected, claiming it was inadmissible, but the judge overruled. Ethan had authenticated it through Leah's meticulous chain of custody work. The room shifted, whispers rippled through the gallery. Howard's smirk faltered, his fingers drumming on the table. Cross-examination was brutal. Preston grilled Matt, trying to trip him on dates, but Matt held firm, his anger simmering beneath every answer. Carla wavered under pressure, but Ethan bolstered her with calm follow-ups, drawing out her fear of Hartman's wrath. Voss was unshakable. Decades of guilt had forged his resolve. By the time Ethan rested his case, the air was thick with anticipation. Howard took the stand last, his voice smooth as silk. "I've served justice for 30 years, he said, leaning into his gravitas. "These accusations are a desperate grab at relevance from a man who can't let go of family baggage." But Ethan pounced on Cross, wielding discrepancies in Hartman's old testimony against Voss's records. "You signed off on shredding evidence, Mr. Hartman. You profited while my uncle lost everything. How's that justice?" Howard stammered, his polish cracking, and the gallery sensed blood in the water. Closing arguments sealed it. Ethan faced the judge, his tone earnest. "This isn't vengeance, it's restitution. For Richard Crowe, for Matthew Riley, for every life crushed under this firm's greed. The law demands truth, Your Honor. Deliver it." Preston's rebuttal leaned on bluster, but it rang hollow against the evidence's weight. The judge deliberated for an hour, a tense eternity. When she returned, her voice was firm. "The court finds Hartman Partners, and Howard Hartman personally, liable for fraud, evidence tampering, and coercion. Damages awarded, $10 million, to be paid to the plaintiffs and a children's charity of their choice. Mr. Hartman, your license is recommended for review." The gavel struck, and the room erupted. Gasps, cheers, camera clicks. Howard slumped, his team scrambling to regroup, but the damage was done. Outside, reporters swarmed Ethan and Matt. "Justice won," Ethan said simply, shielding Matt from the chaos. Later, in a quiet diner, they met Jacob, safe now, his grin wide as he hugged his brother. Leah joined them, her rare smile breaking through. "You did it," she said, clapping Ethan's shoulder. Over coffee, Ethan pieced it together with Matt. Richard, framed and broken, had fled after his conviction, dying years later in obscurity. His son, Matt and Jacob's father, had been a baby then, adopted out when Richard's wife passed in grief. The birthmark tied them, a thread Hartman couldn't sever. "You're my cousins," Ethan said, the words strange but warm. Matt nodded, eyes misty. "Family. Didn't think I had any left." The $10 million went to St. Mary's and a new fund for legal aid, Ethan's way of honoring Richard's memory. Howard faced disbarment proceedings, his empire crumbling as clients fled and investigations deepened. The tabloids flipped, hailing Ethan as a hero. Crusader crushes corruption. But to him, the Real win was quieter, sitting with Matt and Jacob, sharing stories of a past reclaimed. That night, in his penthouse, Ethan stood by the window, the city's lights a steady pulse. The emptiness he'd once felt was gone, replaced by a weight he welcomed: connection, purpose. He glanced at his wrist, the birthmark a badge now, not a quirk. Hartman had lost, not to rage or revenge, but to the law Ethan wielded like a shield. Justice hadn't just prevailed, it had healed. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt whole.